Welcome to Your Doctor Wants to Quit, a podcast inspired by the need to save healthcare in America. I am Dr. Joy, a board-certified emergency physician, and I created this podcast to shed light on the challenges our healthcare system is facing through the multiple lenses of doctors, other healthcare professionals, and patients. By listening and working together, I believe we can fix healthcare in America for all of us.
One person told the story how she almost died after giving birth to her daughter. And the story culminated with they rush her back into the OR. And as she's going in, she's saying to the attending, "Please don't let me die. Please don't let me die. I just had a baby." The whole place was just like in tears.
People just get up and they're like, I have a story too, and I want to tell my story. So that, I think, is telling. It's a powerful, valuable experience.
It's obviously important for the speaker and the storyteller, but for everyone in the audience too, who's then thinking about their own lived experience. Everyone in the audience is also processing their own stories, even if they didn't get up there to speak.
You are hearing the voices of three emergency physicians, Josh Schiller, Arlene Chung, and Mert Arigel. These doctors are the founders of Airway, a storytelling movement that provides a space for physicians to be vulnerable, to process trauma, and most importantly, to be heard.
My name is Josh Schiller. I am an emergency medicine physician in Brooklyn, New York, specifically Central Brooklyn, at Maimonides Medical Center. And I've been working there for probably close to 15 years. And I function as an attending physician, and I also direct global health projects and social emergency medicine projects for the department.
I'm Mert Arigel. I'm an emergency doctor at Maimonides with Josh. I've been there for about 10 years, and before that, 15 years at Kings County Hospital, SUNY Downstate, where I did a lot of medical education. I ran a doctoring course for medical students. I still teach a literature course there for senior medical students. And I'm also board certified in obesity medicine, and I have a clinic at Maimonides where I treat patients with metabolic dysfunction. My dad is a doctor, and my brother's a doctor. And growing up, all of our friends were doctors. We didn't have any non-doctor friends. So we were immigrants in suburban Detroit, and we'd be at a gathering and a beeper would go off and everybody would sort of reach for their belt. And I sort of prematurely foreclosed my identity on being a doctor and didn't really consider anything else until college, when I decided I'm going to study literature. So I got a degree in comp lit and took some time off and ultimately ended up going to medical school. I hadn't really prepared for anything else other than, I'd gotten all the medical school prerequisites out of the way. And the other option was moving to Europe and writing or going to grad school in comp lit. But I'd never thought about whatever other people do. What other jobs are there? And I didn't want to just work in a cafe or, just sort of live and learn about myself. So I took a year off and traveled. I went to India. I traveled through India and Thailand and China and Japan. And I met a lot of people who sort of were, living for years without any borders or boundaries and selling things, bracelets or whatever. And it just didn't appeal to me. I wanted to sort of get a career. And I had a couple of experiences, I guess, that were pseudo-medical experiences in India. So anyway, so I came back and went to medical school. And it was tough. I mean, I didn't love medical school. I didn't feel like my values were perfectly, reflected. It was a real struggle for me. And then I kind of fit the medical identity or assumed the identity later in life. It made more sense to me as I matured.
My name is Arlene Chung. I also practiced at Maimonides in Brooklyn for 10 years before escaping the great city of New York to come up to the great state of Vermont. I currently work at the University of Vermont in their health network in the Department of Emergency Medicine. And in my day job, I'm the Vice Chair of Academic Affairs. I too grew up in a family of doctors. Maybe not quite so many immigrant doctors as you did, Mert, but certainly a similar experience. And I too thought I was going to be a writer when I entered college. And in fact, in my high school yearbook, we all made little predictions what we were going to do in 10 years. And mine was that I was going to be a writer living alone in the middle of a forest in a cabin. I entered university and I did a class my freshman year, and it was actually the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was like, this is unbelievable. And so I decided to just switch to the pre-med route because that just seemed like way more like doable for me and my brain, and similar to Mert, but maybe not to such a great extent. I mean, I've always loved stories and literature and the humanities, and I think medicine lends itself to that in a way that I think some of the other science and scientific fields do not. I think there's much more of a humanity component to it, obviously, and a creative side that you can find and to channel and to outlet. And maybe that's not so surprising that actually the three of us found each other and ended up doing what we're doing now.
A common thread connects these three doctors. From a young age, they all were intrinsically drawn to expressive art forms. The artistic thread they share, woven together by fate, cast the perfect foundation for Airway. In high school, Arlene dreamed of becoming a writer. Mert studied comparative literature in college and now teaches literature to medical students. And although Josh took a more circuitous path to medical school, there was a time before his doctoring days when he could be found leaning against his motorcycle under the open sky, penning lines of poetry.
I think I've had the antithetical road from these guys. Although what's interesting, I don't know if we've actually really made this connection, but my father was a doctor. I also have two brothers who are doctors. And kind of as a result of that kind of background, I tried everything I could to not be a doctor. In fact, I was the oldest person in my medical school class because I majored in economics. I took my first job overseas teaching. I'm dating myself, but I went through the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. I was living in the Middle East, and it was an extremely powerful time to watch world events happen right in front of me, missiles overhead and being shot down. I was evacuated and then brought back to finish out the term in the school for those students who were not evacuated. But after the end of that school year, there was no student body really left. So I left, I came back to the United States and worked for a consulting firm. And, I did a lot of technical writing and analysis, and I hated it because I had no sense of I was not really it wasn't a very humanistic pursuit. And it sort of represented maybe 20% of my interest. So I left my job, bought a motorcycle. I actually didn't have a license at the time. I only had a permit, but I took off. I was living in Boston, took off and spent a year on the road reading, writing poetry. I will brag just for a moment that I actually never spent one day of that year in a hotel, a motel. I camped out in monasteries and Indian reservations, on people's backyards, state parks, tops of mountains, in the middle of valleys, beside my bike. And it was an intense time for me. I ended up settling in Montana, became a framing carpenter. And then while I was there, this little small town library in the mountains had a couple of books on the Middle East. Really, actually three. That was their Middle East section. And this is before the internet, so that was the main impetus of any sort of externalized information. So I ended up reading the books, and it turns out that the author was a professor at Columbia. He's actually a professor emeritus now. But I called him because I was kind of interested, and I was lonely, actually, when I look back on it, the middle of the winter. They have an expression in Montana. Living in Montana is 9 months of winter and 3 months of company. And so, because it's just cold from September to May, and then everybody comes to visit when it's not cold. But it was a long winter. I ended up talking to that guy, which ended up a monthly, hour-long conversation. He ultimately encouraged me to apply to this graduate school in international politics at School of International Public Affairs at Columbia. I went there, ended up working for the Council on Foreign Relations and UNDP. And while I was in Egypt, I decided to go to medical school. So I came back to the United States, studied my pre-med, and went to medical school. And there was a little group of us in the back of the medical student class. We were all the older, the elders. We were sort of simultaneously intimidating and made fun of by the rest of the class. But medical school was difficult for me as well. I found it tough. Medical school, medical education, I think, has progressed, but I think in a lot of ways it's very kind of like rote memorization, and you're supposed to behave in a certain way. And, being older, a lot of our teachers were like my age or a little bit younger, and they hadn't really gone through, like, they haven't lived life, college, medical school, residency, and then doctor. And so, in a lot of ways, they lack the kind of experience that I think, as time has gone on, is really the most important thing about doctoring. It's not about remembering the top 10 reasons for hyperkalemia. It's about being able to connect to your patients and bringing your experiences, and not just with your physical skills, but with interacting with a number of different people in different cultures, and being able to relate in a real way with somebody who might actually have high stakes in that interaction.
That's a really powerful statement. I think what you're trying to kind of speak to is the importance of authenticity and human connection in medicine. I do think that in medical education, especially in the past, and hopefully it's improving, that was maybe understated or not emphasized. But I do agree that the physicians that I know that have been the most successful in their careers in making an impact on the people that they take care of are those that can connect with them, that can listen, that can really meet people where they're at and understand their experience. And it's a good reminder of that. And I think it's a great segue into talking a little bit about the Airway project, because I feel like in a way you're sort of doing that in the reverse. Tell me how you started Airway. Whose idea was it? Where did the idea come from? What was it like when you first started doing it?
Mert started it.
What? I have a very distinct memory of you and I, Josh, standing in the middle of the ED. I don't remember what we were doing. We were standing there in the middle, and we were having this conversation, and we were thinking, wouldn't it be awesome if there was some platform or venue or just way that we, and at the time it was as emergency physicians, could get together and just share our collective lived experience with each other? Like, wouldn't that be really amazing? I remember having this conversation with you.
Yeah, no, we did, but I didn't actually mention it because I was trying to, I'm like a sort of a poser. But Mert had been doing it for years previous, and he had told me about it, and I was like, that's cool, and it's also doable. And so I think that's how you and I ended up having that conversation. But Mert started it at Downstate.
I copied it off of The Moth. You know The Moth, right, Troy? There's this sort of very well-established storytelling form that was started by George Green, who's this sort of distinguished Southern gentleman who's also a writer. And I got to know him and would tell him stories from the hospital. And he encouraged me to do something in the medical school. And I was doing it with medical students, thinking it would be an educational tool to help them reframe their experience. And we did it informally, and it was great. It was great fun. And I was moved to tell my stories too. And when I came to MIMO, we remember the first night that we did it, the first event that we had in the basement of, was it in the basement of Vaughn? It wasn't even in the basement. It was in the side.
It was a side
Corridor.
thing.
Yeah.
It was like a hallway, really.
Oh, man.
It was a weird, I just remember, Josh, you had your shoes off. We were all very comfortable. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I thought everybody told stories, and it was super informal, and the residents told stories, and the faculty told stories. And afterward, we were like, that was just great. That was a great experience.
And then we said we should again.
Yes.
So
we did. And we knew that it was going to be, I mean, you could tell from the way the audience, it was on a roller coaster. One person told the story about how she almost died after giving birth to her daughter, and how, the story basically culminated with her, she had post C-section bleeding. No one was recognizing that she was bleeding in the PACU, but she could see her, she's watching the monitor. She's getting like progressively hypotensive and tachycardic. And finally, she made the resident call the attending. The attending comes in, like they rush her back into the OR. And as she's going in, she's saying to the attending, please don't let me die. please don't let me die. I just had a baby. And I just looked out. I had already heard the story, but I was just like, oh, God. The whole place was just in tears. And I knew, and we all knew, like the three of us knew, we're like, this is just great. Then the next story was this guy, he's a gay man, resident, who was telling the story about his favorite gay porn star who would come in with priapism. It was just like, it was just like the perfect comic relief. The way he said it was so funny. It was just such a great, funny story, very New York. And it just like brought everybody right back up. And it was like, that's Airway. That's the beauty of a shared experience.
So in the beginning, the audience was really other physicians, right? Residents and maybe medical students, attendings.
Yeah, up until very recently, actually. We've only done 2 events for the general public, and they were great. But fundamentally, this is a community building sort of thing for doctors. Maybe there's a future for it as as a show that we take on the road for public audiences. But I think it's really valuable for communities of physicians to connect this way.
I know you said that people were just kind of floored by these stories, but did you get any verbal feedback or what kind of commentary came out of that?
Great event.
Not a lot of
I think
didn't really
people
have much to
people
say.
like, what we typically do is we have some ringers, some people in advance who are prepared to tell a story because we don't want dead space. But then it's surprising how many people get up and are moved to contribute. And so that I think is a surprising thing, how people just get up and they're like, I have a story too, and I want to tell my story. So that I think is telling. But I think it's a powerful, valuable experience. And what's also nice about it is that residents tell stories without the fear of judgment, because the faculty also get up and tell stories without the fear of judgment. And it's very leveling of hierarchy, which is, I think, in some ways unique to emergency medicine, because we've done a couple of Airways stories for other audiences like internal medicine, where there's a bigger hierarchical difference between the attendings and the residents. And I think they're a little more reluctant to mingle like that, to share their stories. But I don't know, what did you guys think?
My take on it was, these events are, by the time it ends, everybody just immediately communes and starts talking about what just happened, and they file out. And it's like hearing something like a conversation or joke or something in a social setting where what just happened is self-evident. Like when you have someone inspired by something that was just said, they stand up. I mean, we've seen people come up there and talk about how they're struggling. They'll let on to something that they've never admitted to anybody, and they'll admit it to an open. We had one resident who had contracted hepatitis, Hep B, from a needle stick, had not told anybody, but then at the Airway came out with it and talked about her struggle, and it was just like everybody held their breath when she was going through, and you could tell she was processing it as she was saying it. And so, when she stepped down, people just kind of let that be. But I mean, it didn't need to be described. It was something felt by everybody. And there's similar stories that have occurred on countless occasions that I think they just speak for themselves. So like the response is really just written on people's faces. And then sometimes just the silence and the quiet of a crowd taking something in and just processing that information, because it can be heavy.
How did it make you feel inside, and did it influence your practice of medicine, or did you carry that with you on your next shift?
There is not enough time or space in the course of the actual clinical shift to do any of this. Like it's too fast. There's too much, and you have a job to do, quite frankly. And so I think there aren't that many spaces that exist out there for people to really have the catharsis and the processing in a shared safe space with other people who understand what they're going through. I think after we started having the events, that was clearly a very understood process that was going on. I mean, it's obviously important for the speaker and the storyteller, but for everyone in the audience too, who's then thinking about their own lived experience and the ways that parallels what they're hearing and in ways that are different. I think everyone in the audience is also processing their own stories, even if they didn't get up there to speak.
As emergency physicians, we bear witness to the stories of our patients every single day too, and they tend to be intense stories many, many times. And processing isn't something that we're trained to do in our field. We're just trained to just keep going, move on to the next thing. And I can remember being in residency and coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my baby girl was asleep and her dad was asleep, and I'm in the house by myself, but my brain is completely amped up because I just witnessed a child die that evening. And I can't go to sleep, but I got to wake up the next morning and do it all over again. And how do you work through that? How do you somehow move forward in a way that you can still be productive and also healthy emotionally and mentally at the same time? And then when that bleeds into, well, not only is it the trauma that we are witnessing that our patients experience, but also our own personal trauma. And we don't have a well-established mechanism internally to deal with those things as well. And we don't have opportunities to be vulnerable and share and connect the way human beings are designed to do. It can be very isolating. And I think more and more the idea of taking care of our mental health in medicine has come to light in the last few years, especially with the pandemic. I think we're doing a little bit better job of paying attention to physician mental health, but I still think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I would also say that it also improves our care because, like you said, and Arlene was saying, there's no processing, there's no moment. It's one thing when you have a really horrible outcome to something that happens in the emergency room, but what's even harder than that is it right as that's happening and you're consoling the grieving mother whose son just died from a gunshot wound. Then someone's coming in and saying, "Doctor, you need to be in the next room because something else is going on." And so you need to just then shut that down and be present for the next episode of that evening or that hour for that matter. So that the coping mechanism I find is that people walk out of the emergency room, they just want to forget everything because they don't want to take that burden with them. It's so hard. And it's hard to relate to the outside world because they don't know, they don't know what it's like to have to do that and at that kind of pace. But the problem with forgetting is that you forget what you've done. You forget, the amazing things you do. And that's how a lot of times doctoring is wired. And so what Airway does is kind of try and get people to remember what they do, because not only does it give you a sense of content for the positive things that we do as doctors, but it also gives us meaning that we're actually doing something that has impact. And that when we look back on our career, we can think of things that we've done that are just amazing. Just even if it's something we bear witness to, it's really important. And I think there's so much drama in the emergency room in the hospital in general. It's worth paying attention to. It can be beautiful, even if it's not all good.
Yeah, if we can just figure out a way to pause and take it all in and share it with other people that understand, like you said. It takes courage for doctors to share these emotionally charged and harrowing experiences among peers, but taking these stories to the general public invites an entirely new kind of vulnerability. Unafraid to spill their guts in front of a broader audience, Airway has begun hosting storytelling events at the Brooklyn Public Library, a venue where literally anyone may attend. You were talking about how you just recently opened this up to do public events. And I'm wondering, number one, was there a specific motivation behind that? And number two, have you gotten responses from lay people that attended these sessions?
I think the most powerful response I got were from a couple of kids that were at the Airway event we had at the Brooklyn Public Library, which was really a big event that was well attended by the general public. I think that they were profoundly moved to hear how things go down at the bedside with critically ill patients. And so the reason I found that moving was because, these kids are the future. You could kind of imagine that maybe their career path wasn't, completely altered, but, I think it plants the seed that maybe this is something they'd be interested in. And so maybe in a subtle way, it changes their trajectory and how they see themselves in the world in the future. And I like that. What do you think, Mert?
I mean, it's different. It's different. You feel a little mindful that you're not talking to doctors. And the meaning of that talk is different because you're exposing not just yourself, but your profession in a way. And one of the speakers, Grace, told a story of how she didn't like doing these difficult procedures like a lateral canthotomy. And you know what? I can relate, but it's like peeling back the veil and revealing something about the profession that, in a way, the basis of a profession is it's this self-governing sort of hermetically sealed organization. So it felt a little transgressive.
Do you think there were benefits, though, of being vulnerable in front of the general public?
I think actually this is something that we spoke about, Joy. There's this crisis of, the loss of expertise and the value of expertise and the loss of the professional and the value of the doctor in society. And so people now are like, they don't trust doctors as much. Maybe humanizing the experience of medicine and revealing that we're people trying our best in an imperfect system, maybe that will serve some good.
What comes to mind for me is I wonder if, similar to what you said about when you would kind of level the playing field in the hierarchy of the hospital, in a way, maybe this somewhat levels the playing field between people and other people that happen to be doctors, because we all just are people helping each other. And I wonder if, kind of along the lines of what you were getting at, Mert, about the rapport building and humanizing physicians, I think that there is some benefit that if you level the playing field to some extent, knowing that one person has more expertise, obviously, in medicine, but we can create more rapport with the people that we serve, we might be able to serve them better because they may be more open with us and they may be more willing to be vulnerable in a way that we can hear what their needs are and then in turn serve them better.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there's this huge level of distrust right now. In fact, I'll tell you a story. There was a friend of mine who's an ER doctor, had a patient who came in for polydipsia, polyuria, high glucose, and he's like a 25-year-old guy. And he told this patient, he's like, I think you have diabetes. And the patient's like, no, I don't have diabetes. He said, no, actually, you have diabetes, I'm telling you. And the patient said, with all due respect, doctor, I don't have diabetes. And I'll be fine, thank you. And then the medical doctor said, you know what, let's put it in ChatGPT. And so they put in the lab values, drinking too much water, urinating too much. And ChatGPT was like, you have diabetes. And the man was crestfallen. He was like, oh my God, I have diabetes. It's terrible. He was like, he was actually like really, it was really, hit him hard. But there's so many books, what your doctor doesn't tell you, what the medical profession doesn't, like there's this weird sort of motif that doctors are not to be trusted that has accrued. I think maybe something like this could help. People will see we're just like they are, except we have more educational debt, but we also care, we have we also are trying our best and trying to help, which is the truth.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's really neat to hear that story. I think what your colleague did was really great. I mean, to kind of turn it around and say, okay, I can understand that you may not trust me. That's a powerful thing to say, to acknowledge it and not be dismissive of the person's concerns with trust. And then to say, let's use a tool that we can both understand and then use that as a vehicle for a conversation to help keep you safe. And that is kind of the shift in tone that I think is going to be necessary as we move into, even deeper into the digital age with AI exploding. I think this time next year, it's going to be hard to tell what's real and what's not real. It already is becoming that way. So, the future is uncertain, but I still think that human beings need to be able to relate to each other, trust each other, build human connection. And that is the heart of the art of medicine, in my opinion. And that's the thing that AI can never replace. In my practice now, I have a lot of people that come in that, they do their own research, and I encourage it a lot. Bring whatever study you're seeing online and we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about whether that was a valid study or whether that's something we should use for decision making or not, depending on the level of evidence and things like that. And it can be really powerful to just validate someone and say, okay, yeah, your ideas matter and I want to hear what they are. And I might have different ideas, but we'll figure it out together. taking that collaborative approach. But I also think that it's a cultural shift for doctors because historically it's been the opposite of that, right? There's a huge power differential. I'm the physician and I know everything, and you're the patient and you do what I say. We're not all the way to the place where it's a level playing field, but I think if we can keep that in mind as a strategy to be able to better serve people through connection and rapport, it's going to help us in the long run, and it's going to help us as a society move forward in healthcare. Because I agree with you, it's scary what's happening right now. And part of why I started this podcast is because I feel like there are so many things wrong in our healthcare system, but we kind of carry all of that as doctors and try to protect our patients from it and just solve the problem for the patients that we are caring for. But we don't often let them see under the hood. And I think sometimes when people are going through the healthcare system and they're running into roadblocks or barriers or things don't go as planned, and it's a systems issue, people don't understand where that comes from. And the easy kind of knee-jerk response is, oh, like my doctor didn't do something they were supposed to do, or, the doctor's on the side of the insurance companies or the pharmaceutical companies or whatever it may be. And the reason I started this podcast was really to break it down and let people see under the hood, like, hey, we're on the same team here. Like, we are with you. We are in this together. And I think we are facing a huge challenge in the future because our healthcare system is in trouble, in my opinion. And unless physicians and the people that we take care of, our patients, unless we can be in alignment, we're going to be divided by the system, in my opinion. What I would love is for people to see that physicians are suffering too because of the issues in the healthcare system. We don't like how things are. We want it to be better and we want to be able to take better care of our patients. But a lot of times there are things that are put in our path that prevent us from doing the things that we would want to do the way we would want to do them. I want people to see that. I want it to be exposed. And maybe we can figure out how to fix it. Lofty goals.
But worthy.
Yeah, worthy effort. So, I think transparency and leveling the playing field and authenticity and human connection, those are such important concepts moving forward.
Yeah, I think having patients perceive us as, I'd say, ardent healthcare advisors to them. We're being consulted by them for our opinions. And, in the emergency room, it's, you have to establish that kind of connection in like 5 minutes. And so, it's challenging, particularly in a place where there's not a lot of privacy. It's loud. People feel vulnerable. And it's hard to establish some sort of connection that makes people feel safe.
But over time, I think that's something that you all, I'm sure, have cultivated. You found ways to do it, or you wouldn't be effective, right? I mean, we all have to figure out how to make an instant connection with people, and it's hard to do, but it's a skill that you cultivate over time. And usually when people come in, they're in crisis too. So there's something really intense going on as well, which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. And I'd also say that, there's a certain chunk of patients who come into the emergency room who really just need reassurance. But to be reassured, they need to trust who it is that is reassuring them. Yeah. And so, particularly in times like COVID or swine flu back in, when was that? Like 10 years ago, when people came in just really more scared than anything else. Not all of them. Some of them were actually sick, but but COVID was a modern day phenomena where we did a lot of reassuring, and also a lot of admitting because patients are actually sick. But there was a lot of fear out there, and I think there's always that element when people feel not right and come into the ER.
That was the first time that I can remember in my lifetime, or my career, I should say, that I really felt like medicine became so politicized. It was very demoralizing. And I think a lot of battle wounds from that period, especially for those that worked in healthcare, came out of that period, feeling even more burned out, more disenfranchised. And there's some healing that needs to happen. And I think like your project, Airway, and other things like that, I think are going to help build those bridges and help people hopefully feel less burned out, hopefully feel more connected and more empowered, that they have a voice.
Yeah, I mean, I think Airway's good in that it doesn't come off as an institutionalized modality for de-stress, which I think is like the the ogre in the mix of, how an institution will be like, we want people to feel like they can just get whatever they want off their chest. We're going to meet in the cafeteria and we're going to have turkey sandwiches with the CEO and the head of human resources, and we're going to do a gratitude journal. Then we're going to talk about our stories and how grateful we are to have, Hospital X serving the public. It's just like people, that's not going to, pop off so well. And so I think the thing about Airway is that there are uncomfortable stories, but that's reality. And we can pretend that it's something different to appease people's fears of like a physician not being perfect, but that's just not what's going on. And so I think that full disclosure gives people a better understanding of what to expect and what we can do, what we can't do, and what the role of the emergency room is, and more generally what the roles of the hospitals are.
Yeah, and by proving that we're willing to be vulnerable and honest, that builds trust. And I think, like what Mert was saying earlier, it can actually work in the favor of building that rapport with the patients that we take care of. Although it seems counterintuitive, right? Admitting vulnerability, you would think, would make people trust you less, but actually admitting vulnerability may make people trust you more because you're not trying to hide something, you're not trying to put on a front.
Well, I think people pick up on that. And that is why Airway works, as opposed to maybe the example that you shared earlier, Josh, is that there is that element of authenticity and realness that I think as humans, like, we just would pick up if there was a different way in which I can imagine a different way in which Airway could be presented that was a very sterile version of it that would not nearly resonate in the same way. Whether it's a public facing audience or, a healthcare facing audience, it would have the same problem. And I think, that level of human connection just wouldn't be there. Exactly, Joy, that you said, that there's not that element of vulnerability that really connects people there.
Airway's public events have captured recent attention from the media, including an article featured in the New York Times by journalist Lisa Miller titled "Real Doctors of New York Spill Their Guts." Despite its growing popularity, for now Airway remains a side project and a labor of love for these doctors. The core of their professional lives happens in the emergency department, providing high-stakes care in the face of limited resources. I asked these founders of Airway to share their perspective on the challenges we face in healthcare.
Quite frankly, I think the greatest ethical challenge is that it's just trying to provide our best clinical care that we can in a system that is really strapped for resources. So whether we're talking space, finances, even if it's just basic stuff of just trying to do the right thing for the patients in a system that is increasingly becoming more difficult to operate in, I think fundamentally that's it. And it's interesting because if you tie that back to the whole discussion about burnout and healthcare, I mean, fundamentally that's also the same problem. It's trying to exist in a system that is not able to provide adequate resources for us to do the job that we want to do. And that is functionally the definition of what happens when you experience burnout. So it's all the same. And I think, people talk about what's the best way forward. And I think there's a way in which you can despair and kind of throw up your hands and say, there's nothing we can do. But I don't know how you can exist like that. Like, I think there's another approach where we try our best, right? We try to be innovative and we try to use it as a crucible for finding really interesting ways to do the right thing in the current climate. And whether it's sharing stories and sharing those experiences and finding a way forward or other innovative solutions, it is a really hard time to be a patient. It is a really hard time to exist in healthcare. I think on the flip side, you could argue it is also a really interesting time. And who knows, right? We don't know what the future is going to look like. And I think it would be nice to try to remain optimistic. And maybe that's just my perspective on it. But I do think some of this and just being vulnerable, like remembering our humanity through it, and that we're all functionally going through this together, I think can help no matter what the outcome.
The real challenge in emergency medicine is maintaining your sense of motivation and meaning. It's the specialty with the highest rate of burnout for obvious reasons. And increasingly, people are practicing in these weird practice environments with private equity and these employers that don't necessarily have the patient's best interest in mind. So I think that's a real challenge, maintaining your sense of purpose and meaning and desire to serve in the face of all these challenges. I don't have a solution, but
as the physician, you have to carry the torch for that, right? I feel like it's sort of what we signed up for in line with the Hippocratic Oath, like we can't give up on our values because that's the core of why we're here, I think. But it's hard to do that when it feels like everything around you is fighting against it.
I think there are a lot of, like yourself, sure, there are physicians who are speaking out on social media, on podcasts like yours, to draw attention to the problems in medicine. And I think it's going to make a difference. I really do. I see more and more doctors on my social media feeds educating people about, how things need to change. And hopefully that makes a difference.
I think there is a space to have people who are in healthcare, who are physicians and other leaders in the various specialties in the house of medicine, to really to step up and be engaged in a lot of this process. I mean, I asked our students the other day, I'm like, do you have a course that at least touches on like how the healthcare system is funded and, federal and, insurance and all these? And they're like, no, they don't get any of it. They learn all of this later. And it's a fundamental piece of what we can do. And it creates all these ethical dilemmas that we talked about earlier. I didn't mention this at the top, but I've spent most of my, if not all of my career in medical education. And so I spent a lot of time with learners. And I think maybe that's one potential answer. I mean, just from the very beginning, like when folks who are entering medical school start their journey of professional identity formation and what it means to be a physician, it's not just the care that you deliver at the bedside, but it's the care that you deliver more broadly than that throughout the system. And starting that early and making sure that by the time our students graduate from school, from residency training, from fellowship training, like they feel empowered that they can actually have these conversations, be part of these movements, advocate for patients on a bigger level. There are people who do that work and who are interested, but that's not a core part of the curriculum going forward. But it would be really fascinating to see if that narrative changed and that really became a core component of training in healthcare, where like you learn not just the bedside skills, but you really learn how to advocate on a bigger level. Lots of components. You're already like jam-packed full of things that these poor students have to learn, but it would be really fascinating to see how that might change the tenor of the way that advocacy is in the healthcare space.
I think it's really important that we do educate our learners, people that are going into medicine, because I think physicians are really disenfranchised from the business of medicine. It didn't used to be like this back in the day. I mean, think of like a Norman Rockwell kind of view of the family doctor in the town. It was a simple business. Nowadays, it is such a complicated business that there's a whole profession of healthcare administration. It's incredibly complex. It's almost like you can't even really ask a physician to take that on too. And it makes it almost impossible to be successful in private practice because of all of the boxes you have to check and all of the compliance and regulatory oversight and everything. Like you need an engine to run that for you. Also, I think the healthcare industrial complex, or whatever you want to call it, it does not want to incentivize physicians to get involved because they just want physicians to show up and clock in and clock out and collect their salary and check the boxes that they're told to check. But if you really put strong physician leaders in positions that they were really overseeing what's going on and advocating at the national level for how we do things, I think we would have different outcomes. But we're so busy just taking care of people and trying to do the right thing that we don't have the bandwidth for that. And yet we're victims of the system as a result. So how do we keep people that are advocating for the average person, advocating for making things better? How do we keep those people engaged and in leadership roles so that they can actually have a voice and make a difference? I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I know that Mayo Clinic has a policy. That's where I went to medical school. They just won't hire somebody that's just an MBA to be in charge of their health system. Essentially, they don't appoint anybody unless they have an MD or DO. It's a good start, it's a good place to begin. And that kind of thing affects the culture, right? Because the culture trickles from the top down.
I think even just that recognition, the way forward is not to divorce these two entities where you have bedside care delivered by physicians and administrated. In that scenario, the patients just become widgets. We become widgets. So there's got to be some recognition that, there's got to be crosstalk between the two. And whether it's just at least an awareness, a greater awareness that there has to be some kind of integration.
It's a big problem, and I don't have an easy solution, but I just think having these conversations and bringing awareness and having the conversation in a way that can be understood by people that work in healthcare and the average person, I think can hopefully be powerful, because if you don't know what the problems are, then how can you advocate for change? And a lot of the problems are complex and nuanced and not always easily captured by sound bites on the news or social media. Hour by hour, minute by minute, the daily work of physicians and other healthcare providers keep our healthcare system going. This bedside work generates unique insights into the challenges we face in healthcare, but beyond that, it also informs the human experience on a more universal level. The work of caring for the health of others when the stakes are high is inherently messy, beautiful, tragic, hopeful. What Mert, Arlene, and Josh have created through Airway is not just a platform for physicians to tell their stories, but a portal for all of us to look through and to better understand.
I would love for patients to see their doctors as human beings in some ways, and all the conversation that we had about expertise. I think that for doctors, especially young doctors who still are in this period of kind of adolescent invulnerability, it's really hard for them to fully understand what it's like to be sick. And other than getting sick themselves, or having a family member who's very sick and being intimately involved with that, that is a real learning experience, So I don't wish it on anybody, and it always just kind of naturally happens as you get older. But I think there's a difference between an older physician who's had medical problems and gone through things, and then when somebody comes into the hospital, they're like, okay, I totally get it. I totally understand how you're feeling. So I wish there was some way to virtually sort of impart that knowledge. And it's hard. You can't read about it. You can't, even watching a movie or whatever, it's hard to do it on the level of culture. It needs to be for personal experience, I think.
But I do think that you might actually be on to the solution with Airway. I mean, essentially, in a way, what you're doing is you're cultivating empathy by storytelling. It's one of the oldest traditions in humanity, right? Sitting around a campfire and telling a story, debriefing on the day, sharing that experience, and creating that emotional connection helps, I think, to teach empathy. If it can be taught, I think it happens in storytelling. So
I think that helps, yeah.
Yeah, you're on your way to changing the world already.
That's right.
Well, also, I think it's important that we posture, sort of going back to the hidden curriculum where Mert had mentioned that there's a tension between being able to talk about what you go through as a doctor, but also you sacrifice some of your authority. And some doctors don't want to do that. And so that offers a real problem with getting certain people to get over that feeling of people losing their authority with their learners. When you speak out about what it is that you go through as a doctor, I think you not only create empathic insight for people who are still learning the trade, but you also posture yourself as someone who's being able to accept the role and the standard that society places on you as being a physician in a way that is humanistic and, in some cases can be fallible, or also to, enjoy the triumphs of something that goes well. And that sort of runs contrary to having this dispassionate way of rendering care that I think is traditional in medical education.
What keeps you inspired, and what do you hope for Airway in the future?
What keeps me inspired is bringing art to medicine in various ways. And these guys have, I think, seen that value in a common way. There's a lot of creativity that you can use in medicine, whether it's just with one patient or more broadly. And I think that makes practice more interesting, and it also builds value for any number of people who get involved in it. So that's what I aspire for Airway.
I mean, I'm inspired every day by the two of you. I feel like you are both able to articulate, I think, a lot of the feelings that many people cannot. And somehow together we've managed to channel it into something that speaks to people, both within medicine and outside of medicine. And I mean, hopefully we can continue to do that and just bring it to different audiences and continue to make an impact, whether it's locally at the Brooklyn Public Library or beyond, even outside of those walls.
Yeah, I'm likewise inspired by you guys and the work that we do. And I think, medicine is this open-ended experience. There's always something to learn. And you know what? There are people who leave careers in finance or whatever because they don't feel like they're giving anything back. And we're helping people day and night. And the only reason it's a problem is it's because it's too much. It's too much. But helping, I think as you get older, you appreciate the intrinsic value of that kind of work. You don't have to make up some value to it. You're just on a personal level, just helping somebody. It's lovely. It's wonderful.
Well, I'm inspired by all three of you. This has been a really fun conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know all of you, and hopefully in some small way this can support your mission. But I just want to say thank you so much.
Joy, if you ever have any stories you want to tell, send them our way, because we actually are collecting stories, and I think you're a good storyteller.
And it's not just my stories they want. Airway collects and showcases stories from doctors and other healthcare providers around the world through their online archive, and also through participation in their live events. If you have a story you would like to share, please visit airwaystories.com for more information on live events and also for instructions on recording and submitting your story to their digital collection online. Again, that's airwaystories.com. I can't wait to hear what stories you'll tell. Thank you for listening to Your Doctor Wants to Quit. I'm Dr. Joy, a board-certified emergency physician, and I created this podcast because I'm on a quest to fix healthcare through conversation. If you liked what you heard today, please follow this podcast and share it with your family, friends, and colleagues. By spreading awareness, we can bring about change. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Dr. Joy MD. That's DOCTOR Joy MD.